The iron shackles around Seraphina's wrists had rubbed her skin raw, but she was long past caring about such small pains. Silver etchings covered the manacles, ancient symbols that burned against her flesh whenever she moved. Silver was the bane of her kind, weakening even the strongest of werewolves. For an Omega like her, the constant contact was its own special torture. Standing on the wooden platform in the center of the marketplace, she kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching shadows shift as potential buyers circled like vultures. The autumn air carried the scent of approaching winter, sharp and unforgiving like the faces of those who had come to purchase living property. "Next lot!" the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Female, 22 years, house-trained, literate." He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her head up to face the crowd. Sunlight stung her eyes after so many days in the darkness of the holding pens. Decent teeth, all limbs intact, bit scrawny, but she'll fill out with proper feeding. Seraphina's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she didn't resist. Fighting only made things worse. She had learned that lesson months ago when her pack fell to raiders. The strong were killed, the weak were sold. She fell somewhere in between, which meant she got to endure this. "An Omega," the auctioneer continued, his voice dropping slightly as if acknowledging a defect. "But not without uses. Claims to be trained as a healer." A ripple of disinterest moved through the crowd. In a world where strength determined everything, healers were considered almost worthless. Alphas led with power and dominance. Betas served as advisors and strategists. But Omegas were the bottom of the hierarchy, tolerated only for the most menial tasks. "Starting bid is 50 silver, the auctioneer announced with forced enthusiasm. Silence stretched across the marketplace like a held breath. 50 silver might as well be 50 gold for an Omega. Seraphina could see it in the dismissive glances, the way buyers looked through her rather than at her. Too thin, too plain, too broken by years of hunger and hardship. 30 silver, the auctioneer tried, his voice losing some of its confidence. A few men stepped closer, examining her like livestock. Their eyes were cold, calculating. She knew what they were thinking. Kitchen slave, field hand, something disposable. The auctioneer grabbed her hands, turning her palms upward. "Look here," he said desperately. "The moonlight mark. She bears the healing touch." It was true. On her right palm, a crescent moon birthmark glowed faintly silver in the morning light. The rare sign of a born healer, one whose gift went beyond mere herbal knowledge. The scattered laughter that followed made her stomach clench. "Who needs a healer when you've got claws and fast healing?" someone called out. "Waste of silver, that is." 20 silver, came a gravelly voice from the crowd. Seraphina's blood ran cold. The man who stepped forward was broad and scarred, with yellowed teeth and hands that looked like they'd broken more bones than healed them. His eyes stripped her bare, and she saw her future written in his cruel smile. Back-breaking labor, beatings for the smallest mistakes, a life measured in bruises and fear. 20 silver from Garston, the auctioneer said, relief clear in his voice. "Do I hear 25? The silence was deafening. Garston grinned, already counting his coins. 15, he said, haggling like she was a sack of grain. "Look at her. She's half dead already. Lucky if she lasts the winter." The auctioneer's face fell. "Sir, surely—" 15 or I walk," Garston snarled. Seraphina closed her eyes, trying to summon what little strength she had left. Maybe if she worked hard, kept quiet, didn't give him reason to hurt her. "Going once at 15 silver, the auctioneer said, defeat in his voice. 100 gold. The words fell into the marketplace like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the crowd as people turned to locate the source of such an outrageous sum. 100 gold for an Omega? It was unheard of. The very air seemed to thicken, charged with an authority so absolute it made Seraphina's bones ache. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter cut off abruptly. Even the crying children fell silent. "My king," someone whispered, the words barely audible. "The Alpha King Magnus," another voice breathed. "No, it cannot be." Against every rule of survival she'd learned, Seraphina glanced up. The crowd was parting like water, people dropping to their knees as a figure moved through them with predatory grace. The auctioneer had gone white as parchment, his hands trembling as he gripped his podium. And then she saw him. Magnus of the Grey Wolves stood apart from the others, tall and commanding. Though he appeared to be in his mid-30s, rumors placed his true age closer to 50, a testament to the extraordinary vitality of alpha werewolves. His hair was dark as midnight, but shot through with striking silver at the temples, the silver crown, a mark of royal burden among werewolf nobility. His face was carved from stone, all sharp angles and harder edges, weathered by time and battle, yet still arrestingly handsome. A scar ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth, pale against his tanned skin. His clothes were fine but practical, a warrior's attire rather than a king's finery, a man who could afford the best but didn't need to flaunt it. The Alpha King of the Grey Wolves, ruler of the Northern Territories, conqueror of the Frost Mountains, the wolf who had built an empire on the bones of his enemies. What could he possibly want with her? 100 gold, the auctioneer stammered. My lord, are you certain? You doubt your king's word? Magnus's voice was cold as winter wind, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. Garston's face had gone pale. My lord, I had first claim. You had nothing. Golden eyes flicked to the trembling man with casual disdain. Leave now. Garston practically ran from the marketplace, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. The Alpha King stepped onto the platform, and suddenly the space felt impossibly small. This close, Seraphina could sense the power that rolled off him in waves. Not just physical strength, but something deeper, more primal. The essence of an alpha in his prime, a living embodiment of dominance. He studied her with those unsettling golden eyes, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he took her hand in his much larger one, turning it to examine the crescent mark on her palm. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man known for his ruthlessness. A barely perceptible frown crossed his face. As he released her hand, Seraphina noticed something odd. Beneath the edge of his leather glove, a sliver of silvered skin was visible, a scar that shouldn't exist. Werewolves, especially alphas, healed without scars unless the wound was inflicted with silver. And this was no ordinary silver scar, but bore the same ancient symbols as her shackles. Remove these, he ordered the auctioneer, gesturing to her bindings. Silver is for containing rabid wolves, not healers. His unexpected words sent another shock through the crowd. The auctioneer fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them in his haste to comply. As the shackles fell away, Seraphina resisted the urge to rub her raw wrists. You're a healer. The question caught her off guard. Of all the things he could ask, of all the reasons he might have bought her. Yes, my lord, she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. I was trained by the Moonbloom Pack's elders. I know herbs, bone setting, midwifery. Hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. Maybe this was why he saved her. Maybe he valued her skills, saw her as more than just another body to be used and discarded. Good, he said simply, then turned away. Victor. A massive warrior stepped forward from the king's entourage. Unlike the other soldiers with their hard, cruel faces, Victor's countenance was weathered like ancient oak, stern but not unkind. Despite his apparent age, perhaps 70 years, he stood straight-backed and powerful, his silver beard nearly reaching his chest. Alpha King, Victor acknowledged with a bow of his head. Take her to the fortress. See that she's fed, cleaned, and given proper attire. He didn't look back at Seraphina as he strode away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. His warriors formed ranks around him, a moving wall of muscle and menace. Wait, Seraphina called out, taking a step forward. My lord, why did you... Victor's hand clamped down on her shoulder, stopping her cold. Rule 1, he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's used to being obeyed. You don't speak to the Alpha King unless he addresses you directly. Rule 2, you never look him in the eyes. You're property now, girl. Valuable property, but property all the same. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she nodded numbly. At least she wasn't going to be beaten to death in Garston's fields. At least someone valued her healing enough to pay for it. At least she was alive. As Victor led her away from the marketplace, Seraphina caught one last glimpse of the Alpha King's retreating form. He had saved her. Maybe not out of kindness, but he saved her nonetheless. And if he wanted a healer, she would be the best healer he'd ever seen. She had to be. It was the only chance she had. The journey to the Alpha King's territory stretched endlessly before them. They traveled north, away from the settled lands and into the wilds. Forests thickened, mountains rose on the horizon, and the air grew progressively colder. They were entering the Moonlight Valley, the sacred territory of the Grey Wolves. Victor had given her a horse, a sturdy mare with a gentle temperament. "The king paid good money for you," he'd explained. "No sense in damaging the merchandise before we arrive." The wolf warriors around her moved with fluid grace, some on horseback, others occasionally shifting between human and wolf form as the terrain demanded. Their discipline was immediately apparent. They maintained perfect formation at all times, communicating with hand signals and the occasional quiet word. No wasted movement, no unnecessary conversation. "How far to the fortress?" Seraphina asked Victor on the second day of travel. The old beta glanced at her, surprise evident in his pale blue eyes. Few slaves dared speak unless spoken to. 3 more days if the weather holds," he replied after a moment's consideration. "The Grey Wolf Fortress sits at the base of the northern peaks, where the Moonlight Valley narrows." Why did he buy me? The question had been burning in her mind since the auction. 100 gold for an Omega healer is excessive? Victor finished for her, a slight smile touching his weathered face. Perhaps, or perhaps not. His expression grew serious. "You're the 3rd Omega he's purchased this year." Seraphina's heart sank. What happened to the others? "They fled," Victor said simply. "Or so Adalric claims." Adalric. The king's uncle, military leader of the Grey Wolves, second only to Magnus himself. Something in Victor's tone suggested caution. You would do well to avoid his notice if possible. On the 3rd day, they entered the heart of the Moonlight Valley. The forests here were ancient, trees towering hundreds of feet into the sky. Legends said the valley was the birthplace of the first werewolves, blessed by the moon goddess herself. Seraphina could feel the power of the place, a resonance that made her Omega senses tingle. It was also here that her body finally betrayed her. Months of captivity, inadequate food, and the physical drain of the silver shackles had weakened her beyond what her determination could overcome. The world tilted sideways, and suddenly she was falling from her horse, her vision swimming with black spots. She hit the ground hard, her breath leaving her lungs in a painful rush. Around her, she heard the warriors' mocking laughter. "Should have known she wouldn't last," someone sneered. "Weak little Omega can't even ride properly." "Leave her," another voice suggested. "We've wasted enough time." Through her haze of exhaustion, Seraphina heard the heavy tread of boots approaching. She braced herself for a kick, for rough hands dragging her upright, for the casual cruelty she'd learned to expect. Instead, the world around her exploded in a flurry of startled movement. Warriors backed away, horses nickered nervously, and the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, so deep and powerful it vibrated in her chest. Seraphina managed to lift her head just enough to see what had caused such a reaction. Where Magnus had stood moments before, a massive black wolf now crouched. Even on all fours, it stood taller than a man's waist. Its coat was midnight black, with a distinctive silver streak running from between its ears down its spine. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled, not the usual amber or red of transformed werewolves, but a piercing silver that seemed to glow with internal light. No one moved as the great wolf approached Seraphina. Its hot breath ghosted across her face as it studied her. Then, with surprising gentleness, the wolf nudged its massive head under her body, rolling her onto its back. The king was carrying her. Shame burned through Seraphina's exhaustion. To be so weak as to need carrying like a pup was humiliating enough. To be carried by the Alpha King himself before his entire entourage was beyond mortifying. Yet Magnus bore her weight as if she were nothing, his powerful muscles moving smoothly beneath her. His fur was surprisingly soft against her cheek, and the warmth of his body began to seep into her cold limbs. Despite everything, she found herself relaxing against him, her fingers curling into his thick coat. The journey continued with Seraphina on the Wolf King's back. No one dared comment, though she could feel the disapproving stares. Only Victor seemed unconcerned, occasionally checking to ensure she hadn't slipped from her perch. Through half-closed eyes, she saw their destination emerge from the mist as the valley narrowed. The Grey Wolf Fortress was carved directly into the mountainside, a massive structure of black stone and iron. It looked less like a home and more like a weapon thrust into the sky, its towers reaching toward the clouds like claws. Banners bearing the Grey Wolf insignia snapped in the wind. As they passed through the towering gates, Seraphina got her first glimpse of life inside the fortress. The courtyard beyond confirmed her worst fears. Warriors drilled in perfect formation, their snarls and clashing weapons echoing off stone walls. Even the children mirrored their savagery, tiny faces set in fierce scowls as they practiced combat forms with wooden swords. No one smiled, no one laughed. The very air seemed heavy with barely restrained violence. Seraphina thought this might be the most joyless place she had ever seen. Magnus padded to the center of the main courtyard and carefully lowered himself, allowing her to slide off his back. Before she could thank him, a stern voice cut through the air like a blade. "Welcome back, nephew." The words were honey-smooth but left ice in their wake. A tall warrior approached, similar enough to Magnus that they could be closely related, but older, with cruelty etched into every line of his face. His hair was steel gray, pulled back in a severe warrior's knot. Where Magnus had a single scar, this man's face and exposed arms were covered in them. A roadmap of battles survived. "Is this the healer you purchased?" he asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of the investment. Magnus had shifted back to human form with remarkable speed, now standing tall in his full regal attire as if it had never been disturbed by the transformation. "It is, Uncle Adalric," he replied, his voice holding a note of deference that surprised Seraphina. Adalric's lip curled in distaste. "And you carried her here, where the entire pack could see." A stern-faced woman, clearly a servant, tugged urgently at Seraphina's arm, trying to hurry her away from the tension crackling between the two men. But Adalric's next words, spoken low but carrying clearly in the stone courtyard, stopped them both. "The pack watches everything you do, nephew. Every gesture, every moment of weakness. We cannot afford softness, not when we've worked so hard to build our reputation." "She couldn't walk," Magnus began. "She was weak," Adalric cut him off. "And now they've all seen you coddle weakness. What if our enemies heard of this?" The servant's grip tightened on Seraphina's arm, practically dragging her toward the fortress entrance. "That was Adalric, military leader of the Grey Wolves," she whispered urgently. "The king's uncle and advisor. If you value your life, girl, you'll pray he forgets you exist." As they disappeared into the shadows of the fortress, Seraphina could still hear the two men arguing in low, tense voices. The ominous sound followed her into the cold stone halls of her new prison. 3 weeks passed in the fortress, and Seraphina learned to navigate its harsh rhythms. Dawn brought the clash of weapons in the courtyards, the snarls of warriors testing their strength against one another. Midday saw the servants scurrying through stone corridors, keeping the massive structure running with silent efficiency. Evening brought exhausted fighters limping back to their quarters, nursing wounds that could heal so much faster with proper care. But no one asked for that care. Not one single wolf approached the healer who had been purchased at such extraordinary cost. Seraphina scrubbed floors and tended fires, grateful for the steady meals and warm bed that came with her servitude. It was more than she'd dared hope for at the auction block. The work was hard, but honest, and no one raised a hand to her, a luxury she'd almost forgotten existed. Still, watching the daily suffering around her made her heart ache. She saw a young warrior struggling to use his sword arm after a training injury, his shoulder clearly dislocated. When she approached with gentle hands and healing energy already warming her palms, he recoiled like she'd offered him poison. "Get away from me," he snarled, backing against the wall. "I don't need your Omega weakness." "But I could help." "Help?" The warrior spat the word like a curse. "Real wolves heal themselves or die trying. That's what makes us strong." The incident drew a crowd. Other warriors gathered to watch, their faces twisted with disgust, as if she'd committed some unthinkable blasphemy. A senior fighter pushed through the group, his scarred face thunderous. "What's this Omega doing?" he demanded. "Trying to corrupt Elias with her healing nonsense," someone called out. "Healing's for the weak," another added. "No true warrior needs it." The senior fighter's eyes narrowed on Seraphina. "You were bought as a servant, not a healer. Remember your place, Omega." Shame burned her cheeks as she retreated, but confusion burned hotter. If the king bought her as a servant, why ask about her healing at all? Why pay 100 gold for someone to scrub floors? The pattern repeated itself over the following days. A kitchen maid burned her hand on a hot pot. Seraphina offered to heal it, and got shouted at for encouraging clumsiness. A guard developed a festering cut that could turn dangerous. Her suggestion of treatment earned her a lecture about how real wolves don't coddle minor wounds. Each rejection chipped away at her hope a little more. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe Magnus asked about her healing just to confirm what he was buying, not because he intended to use those skills. But then why carry her up the mountain? Why show such unexpected gentleness to a mere servant? One evening, Seraphina found herself in the great hall, cleaning the massive stone fireplace after the evening meal. The hall was deserted except for Victor, who sat at one of the long tables reviewing what appeared to be maps. "Victor," she said quietly, approaching the old beta. "May I ask you something?" He glanced up, those pale blue eyes assessing her. "You may ask. I may not answer." "What are the rules here? The true rules? Not just the ones about not looking the king in the eyes." Victor considered her for a long moment, then sighed. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bench across from him. When she hesitated, he added, "It's permitted when given express instruction. Sit." Seraphina sat, her hands folded in her lap. "The Grey Wolves live by 3 principles," Victor began, his voice low. "First, strength above all. Second, pain is the greatest teacher. Third, weakness must be eliminated." He studied her face. "Do you understand what this means?" "It means healing is considered weakness," she replied. "Precisely. To seek healing is to admit weakness. To offer it is to encourage dependency. Neither has a place in Grey Wolf culture." His weathered face showed no emotion. Magnus's father ruled differently. He believed in mercy, in helping others. He saw the pack as a family, not just a fighting force. "What happened to him?" A shadow passed over Victor's features. "He was betrayed. He and his mate were killed when Magnus was just a boy. Adalric raised him after that, taught him that mercy was a luxury werewolves couldn't afford." "Then why would Magnus buy a healer?" Seraphina pressed. Victor's eyes darted around the hall, ensuring they were truly alone. "That," he said quietly, "is the question I've been asking myself since he brought the first Omega home 6 months ago." A chill ran down Seraphina's spine. "You said they fled." "According to Adalric," Victor corrected. "I have my doubts." Before he could elaborate, the great wooden doors swung open. Magnus strode in with several advisors, discussing patrol routes and supply lines. His voice carried the same cold authority she remembered from the auction, but there was something else there too, a weariness that made her heart clench unexpectedly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the silver at his temples seemed more pronounced than when she'd first seen him. Victor stood immediately, bowing his head in respect. Seraphina scrambled to her feet, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd been taught. "Victor," Magnus acknowledged. "The border reports?" "As you suspected, my king. Red Wolf activity has increased in the eastern passes." Magnus frowned. "Double the patrols. I want to know if they're testing our defenses or merely passing through." As the men discussed strategy, Seraphina quietly returned to her cleaning. She kept her head down, trying to make herself invisible, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the king. Something about him drew her eye despite the danger. In the flickering firelight, she noticed him absently rubbing his wrist, the same wrist where she'd glimpsed the silver scar. A tiny gesture, quickly suppressed, but it spoke of pain. Chronic pain that shouldn't be possible for an alpha werewolf. As if sensing her attention, Magnus's golden eyes flicked in her direction. For a heart-stopping moment, their gazes locked. Seraphina froze, remembering too late that looking directly at the Alpha King was forbidden. The entire hall fell silent. The advisors stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Even Victor looked alarmed. Magnus's face remained impassive, but something flickered in those golden eyes. Not anger, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. The advisors bowed and retreated. Victor hesitated, glancing between Magnus and Seraphina with concern. "You too, old friend," Magnus said, his tone softening slightly. When they were alone, Seraphina braced herself for punishment. Breaking such a fundamental rule would surely earn her at least a beating, perhaps worse. Instead, Magnus did something completely unexpected. He walked to one of the massive tapestries that lined the walls and pushed it aside, revealing a hidden doorway. "Come," he ordered, not looking back to see if she followed. Seraphina hesitated only a moment before her curiosity overcame her fear. The narrow passageway beyond the tapestry spiraled upward, lit by strange blue crystals set into the stone walls. They climbed in silence, higher and higher into the fortress. Finally, they emerged into a circular chamber unlike anything else she'd seen in the Grey Wolf Fortress. Where the rest of the stronghold was austere and martial, this room was beautiful. The domed ceiling was made entirely of glass, offering an unobstructed view of the night sky where the full moon hung huge and radiant. The walls were lined with ancient books and scrolls. Strange artifacts sat on shelves, crystals, bones, and objects she couldn't identify. "The moon room," Magnus said, watching her reaction. "Few know of its existence. Fewer still are permitted entry." "Why am I here?" Seraphina asked, unable to contain her confusion. Magnus moved to the center of the room, where a circular pool of water reflected the moonlight. He knelt beside it, gesturing for her to join him. "I know what you are," he said simply, looking directly into her eyes. "You are a moonlight bearer, the last of your kind, and you may be the only one who can save us all." The revelation hung in the air between them, as Magnus slowly removed his glove to reveal what Seraphina had only glimpsed before. The silver scar on his wrist wasn't just any mark. It was spreading, tendrils of silver extending up his forearm like roots of a poisonous plant. Ancient symbols glowed faintly within the corrupted flesh, the same symbols that had adorned her shackles at the auction. "The silver curse," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's killing my pack, and you're the only one who might be able to stop it." Seraphina stared at the silver tendrils crawling beneath Magnus's skin. The moonlight from the glass dome illuminated every intricate detail of the curse, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her training as a healer. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Silver wounds can be deadly to our kind, but they don't spread like this." Magnus turned his arm in the moonlight, revealing how the corruption had already reached his elbow. "This is no ordinary silver wound. This is the silver curse, created by our enemies to destroy us from within." He gestured toward the reflection pool. As Seraphina gazed into its depths, the water shimmered and transformed, showing images of Grey Wolf warriors in various stages of the same affliction. Some bore only small silver marks, while others were nearly consumed by the metallic corruption. "It began 6 months ago," Magnus continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "A raid on our eastern border. The weapons used by our attackers were coated with something more than silver. Whatever touched our skin left a mark that never healed. Instead, it spread." The pool showed her the progression, the initial wound, the spreading tendrils, and finally, a warrior whose entire body had turned silver, frozen in a grotesque statue of agony. "Once the curse reaches the heart," Magnus said softly, "death follows." Seraphina raised her eyes to his face, momentarily forgetting protocol. "How many?" 12 dead already, 30 more infected, including myself." His golden eyes reflected the moonlight, turning them almost silver. "Adalric believes we should hide this weakness at all costs. He fears our enemies would overwhelm us if they knew our true condition." Understanding dawned on Seraphina. "That's why healing is forbidden. It would reveal the curse." Magnus nodded. "My uncle has convinced our pack that suffering builds strength, that to seek healing is weakness. It was always our way to some degree, but since the curse, he has driven this belief to extremes." "But why purchase healers if you forbid healing?" The Alpha King's expression tightened. "I've been searching for someone with the power to break the curse. The ancient texts speak of the Moonlight Bearers, Omegas with a rare gift that goes beyond ordinary healing. The mark on your palm suggests you might be one of them." Seraphina looked down at the crescent moon on her palm. It had always been there, setting her apart even among other healers. "And the other 2 Omegas you purchased?" Magnus's jaw clenched. "They lacked the true mark. Their healing abilities were insufficient." "Victor said they fled." "That is what Adalric told the pack," Magnus replied carefully. "The truth is more complicated." A chill ran down Seraphina's spine. "Did you kill them when they failed?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation. For a long moment, Magnus simply stared at her, his golden eyes unreadable. "No," he said finally, "but I could not protect them from those who would eliminate any perceived weakness." The implication was clear. Adalric had eliminated the failed healers. "And now it's my turn to try," Seraphina said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What happens if I fail?" Magnus turned away, looking up at the moon through the glass dome. "The curse has nearly reached my heart. I have perhaps a year left, at most. Without a cure, the Grey Wolf Pack will fall to the Red Wolves when I die." He looked back at her, his expression grave. "Adalric will lead them into war and destruction." "You haven't answered my question," Seraphina pressed. "What happens to me if I fail?" The muscle in Magnus's jaw tightened. "I paid 100 gold for you. As long as you remain useful, you remain alive. Whether as a healer or a servant is your choice." It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was honest. Seraphina appreciated that at least. "I need to know more about this curse if I'm going to help," she said. "Its origin, how it spreads, what's been tried already." The ancient texts suggest it was created by the first Red Wolf Alpha, Vermilion, 1,000 years ago, a weapon against rival packs. Magnus gestured to the bookshelves surrounding them. "Everything we know is here, in the moon room. You will have access, but discreetly. No one can know why you are here." "Not even Victor?" "Especially not Victor," Magnus said firmly. "He is loyal, but he reports to Adalric. The fewer who know, the safer you will be." Seraphina nodded, understanding the dangerous position she now occupied. "I will need to see the others who are afflicted, to understand how the curse progresses in different individuals." "That can be arranged, though carefully." Magnus moved toward the hidden entrance. "We begin tomorrow night. After the evening meal, come to the kitchens. A servant will bring you here." As she turned to follow him back down the spiral staircase, Magnus caught her arm. His touch was warm, almost feverish. "Seraphina," he said, using her name for the first time. "The curse is not just killing me. It's killing my pack's future. If Adalric takes control, he will turn the Grey Wolves into something I cannot bear to imagine." The raw emotion in his voice surprised her. This was not the cold, calculating Alpha King she had expected. This was a leader desperate to save his people, even at the cost of his pride. "I will do everything in my power to help," she promised, and meant it. As they descended into the fortress, Seraphina realized how drastically her circumstances had changed in a single evening. She was no longer just a servant. She held the future of the Grey Wolf Pack in her hands. The revelation came with equal parts exhilaration and terror. The following morning, Seraphina went about her servant duties with new awareness. Every interaction, every observation now had deeper significance. The Grey Wolves weren't just cruel by nature. They were a people under siege, their harsh ways calcified by fear and pain. She watched young warriors push through injuries that made her wince, pride forcing them to hide silver marks that crept along their skin. Kitchen staff worked with burned hands rather than reveal their wounds. Guards stood for hours without relief, sweat beading on their foreheads as they fought the pain of the spreading curse. This wasn't strength. This was suffering elevated to a twisted ideal. In the main courtyard, the harsh crack of wood against bone drew her attention. A training session for the younger wolves had turned brutal. A boy of perhaps 12 lay sprawled on the stone ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The other children formed a circle around him, their faces masks of studied indifference despite their youth. Adalric stood over the fallen child, his shadow engulfing the small form. "Get up," he commanded, his voice carrying across the courtyard. The boy tried to stand, only to collapse with a muffled cry when his broken leg gave way. Seraphina could see the effort it took for him to swallow his pain, his young face contorting as he bit his lower lip until it bled. "Pathetic," Adalric sneered, crouching beside the boy. "This is what weakness looks like. This is what we destroy." He grabbed the boy's injured leg, twisting it until another sickening crack echoed through the courtyard. The child's scream pierced the morning air, raw and primal. Something in Seraphina snapped. She didn't think. She didn't consider consequences or proper behavior or the 100 rules that governed her existence here. She just ran. "Stop!" The word tore from her throat as she dropped to her knees beside the child. Her hands were already glowing with healing energy, warmth flowing from her palms into his broken body. The courtyard went completely silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. All eyes fixed on the Omega, who dared to interfere with pack discipline. Seraphina didn't care. Her entire focus narrowed to the boy's injuries. She could feel the broken bones beneath her hands, the torn muscles, the damaged blood vessels. Her healing energy flowed into him, knitting bone back together, repairing torn tissue, soothing inflamed nerves. The boy sobbed quietly as his leg straightened, the unnatural angle correcting itself with gentle precision. When she finished, he stared at her with confused wonder, as if kindness was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. "What is this?" Adalric's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Seraphina looked up to find him looming over her, his face twisted with rage. Behind him, she could see Magnus approaching with measured steps, his expression unreadable. "Your Omega pet defies our ways," Adalric spat, his words dripping venom. "She heals the weakness we were trying to burn out. She must be punished." Magnus stopped beside them, his golden eyes studying the scene. The boy sat up easily, his leg fully healed, while Seraphina knelt beside him, with her hands still glowing faintly with residual energy. Any other Omega would cower now, would beg forgiveness, and promise never to transgress again. But Seraphina lifted her chin and met the king's gaze directly, silently daring him to punish her for an act of mercy. His nostrils flared slightly as he read the defiance in her face. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled with tension. Then, "The boy is more useful healed," he said simply. "He can return to training sooner." Adalric's fist slammed against the nearest wall, cracking the stone. "Nephew," he barked, "you can't allow this. The pack watches. They learn." "Enough." Magnus's voice carried the full weight of his alpha power, making every warrior in the courtyard flinch. "Do not question me again." As guards escorted Seraphina back toward the fortress, she felt Adalric's hatred burning into her back like acid. But it was Magnus's expression that haunted her, that brief moment when his mask slipped, showing something that might have been gratitude. That night, A servant girl came for Seraphina, leading her through back passages to the moon room. Magnus was already there, examining an ancient scroll by the light of the reflecting pool. "You took a terrible risk today," he said without looking up. "The boy didn't deserve such cruelty," Seraphina replied, moving to stand on the opposite side of the pool. "Few do, but that is not how Adalric sees the world." Magnus finally looked at her. "He believes the weak threaten the survival of the pack. He sees mercy as a luxury that leads to extinction." "Is that what you believe?" Magnus didn't answer immediately. He rolled the scroll carefully and replaced it on a shelf. "I believe in survival," he said finally, "but I'm beginning to question the cost." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He cleared his throat, gesturing to the reflection pool. "Tonight we study the curse. Tomorrow night I will take you to see the afflicted." For hours they worked together, examining ancient texts that described the silver curse. The language was archaic, the descriptions often metaphorical rather than literal. But gradually, Seraphina began to understand the nature of what they faced. "It's not just a physical ailment," she said, looking up from a particularly cryptic passage. "It affects the spirit as well." Magnus nodded. "The infected often become more aggressive, more prone to rage and fear. Adalric believes this makes them stronger warriors." "It doesn't. It makes them reckless," Seraphina countered. "A warrior consumed by rage makes mistakes, leaves openings." "A perspective Adalric refuses to consider," Magnus said with a grim smile. "He sees only the increased ferocity, not the cost." As the night wore on, Seraphina felt a strange connection forming between them. The Alpha King was not the heartless tyrant she had expected. In this hidden sanctuary, away from the watching eyes of his pack, he revealed glimpses of a different man, thoughtful, burdened by responsibility, questioning traditions he had been raised to uphold. When the moon began to set, signaling the approach of dawn, Magnus walked her back toward the servants' quarters. They moved silently through the sleeping fortress, careful not to wake those who might question why the king walked with an Omega servant. At her door he paused. "What you did today, for the boy," he said quietly. "It was kind." Before she could respond, he was gone, vanishing into the shadows like the predator he was. The days that followed established a new pattern. By day, Seraphina performed her servant duties, keeping her head down and avoiding Adalric's notice. By night, she studied the silver curse with Magnus in the moonroom, gradually building a deeper understanding of their enemy. A week after the incident with the boy, Magnus summoned her earlier than usual. He was waiting in the moonroom, but this time he was not alone. 3 warriors stood with him, each bearing the telltale signs of the silver curse at different stages. "These men have agreed to let you examine them," Magnus explained. "They understand the need for absolute secrecy." The warriors looked uneasy, clearly uncomfortable with allowing an Omega to touch them. But they were loyal to their Alpha King, and they were afraid of the silver tendrils spreading beneath their skin. Seraphina approached the first, a young beta named Corin, whose forearm bore a small silver mark. "May I?" she asked, extending her hands. He nodded stiffly, offering his arm. Her fingers glowed as she touched the mark, sending gentle pulses of healing energy into his flesh. The silver resisted, seeming to retreat momentarily before pushing back against her efforts. "The curse fights healing," she observed. "It's almost sentient." She moved to the second warrior, an older alpha whose chest bore a larger silver patch directly over his heart. When she touched him, the curse reacted more violently, the silver lines writhing beneath his skin. The warrior grunted in pain, but remained stoic. The third was the most advanced case. Silver covered nearly half his body, and his eyes had begun to take on a metallic sheen. When Seraphina tried to send healing energy into him, the curse lashed back at her, sending a shock of cold pain up her arms. She gasped, stumbling backward. Magnus caught her before she could fall, his hands warm and steady on her shoulders. "That's enough for tonight," he told the warriors. "Return to your quarters. Speak of this to no one." After they had gone, Seraphina sank onto one of the stone benches that ringed the room. Her hands trembled from the encounter with the curse. "It's worse than I thought," she admitted. "The curse doesn't just resist healing, it actively fights back, and it learns." Magnus sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Can it be defeated?" "I don't know yet." She looked down at the crescent mark on her palm. "The Moonbloom elders taught me that true healing comes not from opposing illness, but from understanding it. I need to know why the curse was created, what it wants." "Wants?" Magnus frowned. "It's a curse, not a living thing. Everything has purpose, even magic, especially magic." Seraphina gestured to the ancient texts surrounding them. "The answer is in here somewhere. We just haven't found it yet." Magnus studied her with a new intensity. "You're not what I expected, Seraphina of the Moonbloom Pack." "What did you expect?" "Someone broken, someone desperate to please." His eyes searched hers. "Not someone who would defy Adalric to heal a child. Not someone who would look me in the eye and demand answers." His words warmed something in her chest. "Perhaps you paid too much for me, Alpha King," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Or perhaps," he replied softly, "not nearly enough." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was prepared to name. Then Magnus stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the fortress below. "I leave tomorrow," he announced. "The Red Wolves have been spotted near our southern border. I must lead the response personally." Fear gripped Seraphina's heart. "For how long?" 3 weeks, perhaps more." He turned back to face her. "Continue your research while I'm gone. Victor will ensure you have access to the moon room." "You trust him now?" "With this, yes. He has lost 2 sons to the curse. He wants it ended as much as I do." Seraphina nodded, relief washing through her. The thought of navigating the fortress without any allies was daunting. "Be careful among my people while I'm away," Magnus warned. "Adalric watches you. He sees the threat you pose to his vision of strength through suffering." "I'll be discreet," she promised. "See that you are." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I would not lose you to his schemes, little healer." The following dawn, Seraphina joined the servants lining the battlements to watch the Alpha King's forces assemble below. Hundreds of warriors filled the courtyard, some in human form with gleaming armor, others already shifted into their wolf forms, massive beasts with eyes that burned like coals. At their head sat Magnus on his black destrier, his dark armor fitted perfectly to his powerful frame. Despite the distance, she could feel his power radiating across the courtyard, a tangible force that commanded respect and obedience. His voice carried clearly as he addressed his troops, speaking of honor and strength and the protection of their territory. The warriors responded with thunderous roars and howls of approval. As the army prepared to march, Magnus looked up toward the battlements. Though dozens of servants stood watching, Seraphina felt his gaze find her unerringly. He gave no outward sign of recognition, but she sensed an acknowledgement passing between them, a silent promise of return. She watched until the last warrior vanished from sight, her heart heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite name. In the 3 weeks of studying with Magnus, something had changed between them. The line between master and servant had blurred, replaced by something closer to partnership, and now he was riding to battle with the curse spreading through his body, weakening him in ways his warriors couldn't see. In the days that followed, with Magnus's intimidating presence absent, something unexpected began to happen. The first sign came when a kitchen maid approached Seraphina hesitantly, cradling a burned hand against her chest. "Please," the girl whispered, glancing around nervously. "It hurts so much, and the cook says if I can't work, I'll be turned out." Despite her promise to be discreet, Seraphina couldn't turn the girl away. She drew her into a storage pantry and quickly healed the burn, watching relief flood the girl's face. "Thank you," the maid breathed, flexing her newly healed fingers. "I've never felt anything like that. It was like sunshine flowing through my skin." Word spread quietly through the servants' quarters. The Omega could help, and she would. Soon, others began to seek her out. A stable boy with a kicked shin, A seamstress with fingers pricked raw from rushed needlework. A guard with an infected cut he couldn't afford to report. Each healing was small, hardly the emergencies Magnus had specified. But how could she turn away when they asked so desperately? Victor found her healing a young beta whose training had left him with cracked ribs. Rather than reprimand her, the old warrior closed the door and stood guard. "What you're doing is dangerous," he said when the beta had left, "but necessary." "You don't believe healing is weakness?" Seraphina asked. Victor's weathered face showed a lifetime of hard choices. "I believe suffering without purpose is wasteful. A warrior who heals faster fights sooner. A servant who isn't in pain works better." He gave her a pointed look. "Magnus understands this. It's why he brought you here." "You know about the curse." "I've lost 2 sons to it." Victor's voice roughened with grief. Adalric called their deaths honorable sacrifices. There was nothing honorable about watching silver consume them from within. "I'm trying to find a cure," Seraphina admitted, "but it's complex magic, older than any records we have." Victor nodded gravely. "The curse has existed since the time of the first Pax. My grandmother spoke of it as a legend, a weapon created during the War of Moon and Blood." "The war between the Grey Wolves and the Red Wolves?" "Yes, 1,000 years of hatred, with brief periods of uneasy peace." Victor sighed heavily. "Adalric believes the Red Wolves have revived the curse to weaken us before a major offensive." "But you don't believe that," Seraphina guessed, reading his expression. "The curse is too specific, too personal. It targets the Grey Wolves uniquely." Victor glanced toward the door, lowering his voice further. "There are things about Adalric that few know, things that Magnus himself may not fully understand." Before he could elaborate, footsteps approached in the corridor outside. Victor straightened, resuming his role as stern beta. "Remember your place, Omega," he said loudly for the benefit of whoever might be listening. "The Alpha King did not purchase you to question our ways." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and growing suspicions. As the days passed, Seraphina continued her secret healing practice while studying the curse in the moonroom each night. Though she was careful, she couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere in the fortress was changing. The servants began to smile more often. Laughter occasionally drifted through the corridors. Children who once huddled in corners now played games in the courtyards, their giggles echoing off stone walls that had heard precious little joy. The transformation spread slowly but surely. Warriors who witnessed her healing began to soften their harsh discipline. A trainer who once kicked fallen recruits now helped them to their feet. Even the fortress itself seemed to breathe easier. Where once there was only the sound of clashing weapons and shouted orders, now there was music drifting from the great hall, quiet conversations in the gardens. Seraphina moved through it all with growing confidence, her healing light touching every corner of the king's domain. But not everyone welcomed these changes. 2 weeks after Magnus's departure, Adalric summoned Seraphina to his private study. The room was a monument to warfare. Weapons lined the walls, maps covered every surface, and trophies from conquered enemies hung like grim decorations. Adalric himself sat behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of black oak. His silver hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the harsh planes of his face. The silver curse had spread visibly up his neck since she'd last seen him, reaching toward his jaw in metallic tendrils. "You've been busy, Omega," he said without preamble, "spreading your weakness throughout my fortress." Seraphina kept her eyes lowered, though it cost her. "I serve as the Alpha King commanded, military leader. Do not play games with me, girl. Magnus may have purchased you, but in his absence, I command here." Adalric rose, circling the desk to stand before her. "You undermine everything we have built. With each person you heal, you spread the disease of dependency." "I meant no disrespect to your traditions," she said carefully. "Lies." The word cracked like a whip. "You deliberately challenge our ways. You seek to transform the Grey Wolves into something soft, something vulnerable." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Just as she did." Seraphina risked glancing up. "She?" Pain flashed across Adelric's face, so raw and unexpected that Seraphina almost took a step back. For an instant, she glimpsed a different man beneath the cruel exterior, someone wounded, someone who had loved and lost. The moment passed so quickly she might have imagined it. Adelric's expression hardened once more. "You will cease your healing immediately," he commanded. "Any servant or warrior who seeks your assistance will be severely punished, as will you if you disobey." "And if there's a true emergency?" Seraphina challenged. "Would you let a valuable warrior die rather than permit healing?" Adelric's eyes narrowed. "We survived centuries before you arrived, Omega. We will continue to do so without your interference." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his maps. As she left his study, Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling that she had glimpsed something important. Who was the she Adelric had mentioned, and what had she done to wound him so deeply? That night in the moon room, Seraphina searched the ancient texts with new purpose, looking not just for information about the curse, but for clues about Adelric's past. If she understood him better, perhaps she could navigate the dangerous waters of pack politics more effectively until Magnus returned. Victor joined her shortly after midnight, bringing food and fresh candles. "Adelric has ordered the guards to report anyone seeking healing," he warned. "He means to isolate you." "He mentioned someone from his past today," Seraphina said. "A woman who tried to change the pack, as he believes I'm doing." Victor stilled, his hand frozen in the act of lighting a candle. "He spoke of Lyria?" "He didn't name her, but he seemed pained." The old beta sat heavily on a stone bench. "Lyria was his mate nearly 40 years ago. She was an Omega healer like you, and she was carrying his child when she died." Seraphina's breath caught. "What happened to her?" "The Red Wolves attacked during a rare peace conference. Their leader was gravely wounded. Lyria, being a healer, couldn't stand by and watch any creature suffer. She tried to save him." Victor's eyes grew distant with memory. Adelric saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He denounced her publicly, stripped her of her status as his mate. For showing mercy to an enemy? For healing the wolf who had killed dozens of our pack? Victor sighed heavily. 3 days later, Lyria was found dead. The official story was that Red Wolf assassins killed her for helping their leader. But there were rumors that Adelric was responsible, Seraphina finished softly. Nothing was ever proven. But Adelric changed after that. Where once he had been stern but fair, he became cruel. Mercy became a word he couldn't bear to hear. Healing became weakness to be despised. And the child? Lost with its mother. Victor's face showed ancient grief. Adelric never took another mate, never allowed himself to care for anyone but Magnus, his sister's son. The revelation shed new light on everything Seraphina had observed. Adelric's hatred of healing wasn't just cultural or tactical, it was deeply personal, rooted in trauma and loss. "Does Magnus know this story?" she asked. "Some of it. He was just a boy when it happened." Victor straightened, his moment of vulnerability passing. "Be careful, Seraphina. Adelric sees Lyria's ghost in you. He won't risk losing control of the pack to an Omega healer again." 3 days later, the horns sounded from the watchtower. Not the triumphant call that would signal Magnus's victorious return, but the urgent, desperate wail of emergency. Seraphina abandoned her duties immediately, joining the crowd gathering in the courtyard. Through the gates came 3 riders, their wolves lathered with sweat and foam. Victor led them, his usually impassive face tight with worry. Behind him rode 2 warriors bearing a makeshift stretcher between their mounts. On the stretcher lay Adelric, his body rigid with pain, his skin ashen where it wasn't covered in spreading silver. "What happened?" Seraphina pushed through the crowd, her healing instincts overriding caution. "Ambush," Victor said grimly. "Silver weapons. We lost 7 warriors. Adelric took a blade meant for the king." "Where is Magnus?" Fear clutched at Seraphina's heart. "Still at the southern border with the main force. He sent us ahead with his uncle." Victor dismounted, his movements stiff with fatigue. The military leader's wounds are beyond our treatment. The king commanded us to bring him to you." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Adalric, who had forbidden all healing, was now in need of the very thing he despised. "Take him to his chambers," Seraphina directed. "I'll need clean water, bandages, and privacy." As the warriors carried Adalric into the fortress, Victor held Seraphina back. "The blade was cursed," he whispered. "Not just silver, but carrying the same magic that infects our pack. It's spreading faster than any case I've seen." "How long does he have?" "Hours, not days. The king rides hard behind us, but he may not arrive in time to say farewell." Seraphina's mind raced. Adalric was her enemy, a man who would have gladly seen her punished or killed for the crime of healing. But he was also Magnus's uncle, the last of his family, and he was suffering. "I'll do what I can," she promised. Adalric's private chambers reflected the man himself, austere, martial, devoid of comfort or beauty. The only personal touches were weapons mounted on the walls, each bearing notches that Seraphina suspected represented kills. The warriors placed him on his bed and withdrew, leaving only Victor and Seraphina with the fallen military leader. Adalric's eyes fluttered open as Seraphina approached. Recognition dawned, followed by fury. "No," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Not her. Not Omega healing." "The king commanded it," Victor said firmly. "You will accept treatment, military leader." "I would rather die a warrior's death," Adalric spat, though the effort cost him visibly. Seraphina moved to the bedside, examining the wound without touching it. The silver blade had pierced Adalric's side, driving through armor to sink deep into his flesh. But it wasn't the physical damage that concerned her most. The silver curse radiated from the wound like dark light, consuming his body at an accelerated rate. "This isn't just about you," she said, meeting his hate-filled gaze. "Magnus needs you. The pack needs you." "The pack needs strength," Adalric countered weakly. "Not the false comfort you offer." "Is it strength to abandon your nephew when he needs you most?" Seraphina challenged. "Is it strength to leave your responsibilities unfulfilled?" Something flickered in Adalric's eyes, a grudging respect, perhaps, for her boldness. "I will heal you," Seraphina continued, her voice softening. "Not because I agree with your views, but because Magnus asked it of me. Because despite everything, he loves you." She placed her hands on either side of the wound, not quite touching his skin. Warm, golden light emanated from her palms, flowing toward the angry silver lines that spread across Adalric's torso. As always, the curse fought back, resisting her healing energy. But this time, Seraphina was prepared. Instead of pushing harder, she gentled her approach, letting her light flow around the silver rather than directly opposing it. "I know about Lyria," she said quietly, for Adalric's ears alone. His whole body tensed. "Do not speak her name." "She was a healer, like me. She tried to help, even when it cost her everything." "She was a fool," Adalric growled, though pain undercut his anger. "She trusted our enemies. Her weakness killed her." "Love is not weakness," Seraphina countered, her hands beginning to tremble with the effort of holding back the curse. "Neither is mercy." Adalric's laugh was bitter and broken. "Pretty words from a sheltered Omega. You know nothing of the real world, of what mercy costs." "Then tell me," Seraphina urged, sensing a crack in his armor. "Tell me what really happened to Lyria." For a long moment, Adalric was silent, his harsh breathing the only sound in the room. Then, so softly she almost missed it. "I killed her." The confession hung in the air between them, terrible and final. "Not with my own hands," he continued, his voice hollow, "but with my words. I denounced her before the pack, stripped her of my protection. When the red wolves came for her that night, she had no one to defend her." The raw pain in his voice struck Seraphina like a physical blow. Beneath all his cruelty and hatred, Adalric had been carrying this guilt for 4 decades. "You loved her," Seraphina said gently, "with everything I was." A single tear traced down Adalric's weathered cheek. "And I destroyed her for healing my enemy." Understanding bloomed in Seraphina's mind. "That's why you hate healing so much, not because it's weak, but because it reminds you of her, of what you lost." Adalric didn't deny it. His eyes closed, whether from pain or the weight of memory, Seraphina couldn't tell. "The curse is too strong," she said after several minutes of silent struggle. "I can slow it, but not stop it, not alone." "Then I die," Adalric said, with something like relief in his voice. "Not yet." Seraphina straightened, making a decision. "The king should be here by morning. If we can keep you alive until then, there may be another way." Victor, who had been standing silent guard by the door, stepped forward. "What are you thinking?" "The texts speak of a healing bond between Alpha and Omega that can magnify power." Seraphina looked at the old beta. "If Magnus and I combine our energies, we might be able to drive back the curse." "The Moonlight Bond," Victor breathed. "It hasn't been attempted in centuries." "Because it's dangerous," Adalric rasped. "It binds souls, not just power. It changes both participants forever." "It may be our only chance to save you," Seraphina replied, "and perhaps our best hope of understanding how to cure the entire pack." Through the long night, Seraphina worked tirelessly to keep Adalric alive. She couldn't heal him completely, but she could slow the curse, ease his pain, and give Magnus time to return. In his delirium, Adalric spoke of things long buried: his childhood with Magnus's mother, his first meeting with Lyria, his grief and rage after her death. By dawn, Seraphina understood him better than she ever thought possible. She didn't forgive his cruelty or his attempts to harm her. But she recognized the wounded soul beneath the harsh exterior, the man who had lost everything he loved and built a philosophy of strength through suffering to justify his pain. As the first light of morning crept through the narrow windows, the fortress horns sounded again. This time it was the clear, strong call that announced the return of the Alpha King. Seraphina sagged with relief, her entire body aching from the night's efforts. "He's here," she told Adalric, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep. Victor, who had stayed with her throughout the night, squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll bring him. Rest while you can. What comes next will demand everything you have." Alone with the sleeping Adalric, Seraphina allowed herself a moment of doubt. The Moonlight Bond was more than a healing technique. It was an ancient ritual that would tie her essence to Magnus's in ways neither of them might fully understand. If it succeeded, it could save Adalric and potentially the entire pack. If it failed, both she and Magnus could be consumed by the very curse they sought to cure. More troubling still were the feelings she had developed for the Alpha King. What had begun as fear had evolved into respect, then a tentative trust, and now something deeper that she dared not name. Would he be willing to risk the bond, knowing it might bind them together permanently? Or would he seek another solution, one that maintained the distance between Alpha and Omega, between king and servant? She was still wrestling with these questions when the chamber door burst open. Magnus stood there, his armor stained with battle, his golden eyes immediately finding hers across the room. "How is he?" he asked without preamble. "Alive, but barely," Seraphina replied, rising from her chair beside the bed. "The curse is spreading faster than any case I've seen. It will reach his heart by nightfall." Magnus crossed to the bedside, looking down at his uncle's silver-streaked face. Despite Adalric's harshness, the pain in the Alpha King's eyes was unmistakable. "Can you save him?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Seraphina took a deep breath. "Not alone, but there might be a way, if you're willing to take the risk." Magnus turned to her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Tell me." "The Moonlight Bond," she said simply. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by something that might have been fear. "The texts speak of it as dangerous, unpredictable." "It is," It will bind us together in ways we can't fully predict. Seraphina held his gaze. But it may be the only way to save him, and perhaps the key to curing your entire pack. For a long moment, Magnus was silent, his internal struggle visible only in the tightening of his jaw. Then he looked back at his uncle, the last of his blood, the man who had raised him. "What must we do?" he asked. "We begin at moonrise," Seraphina answered, "and we pray to the moon goddess that we're strong enough for what comes next." The moon room looked different in the glow of the full moon. Ancient symbols carved into the stone floor gleamed with silvery light, creating a perfect circle around the reflection pool. Candles surrounded the perimeter, their flames unnaturally still in the windless chamber. The glass dome above revealed a night sky blazing with stars that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the moonlight flooding the sacred space. In the center of the circle, Adalric lay on a stone altar. The silver curse had consumed nearly his entire body now, metallic tendrils reaching toward his heart with inexorable determination. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one more labored than the last. Without intervention, he would not survive the night. Seraphina had spent the hours since Magnus's return preparing for the ritual. She had bathed in water infused with rare herbs, donned a simple white robe woven with silver threads that caught the moonlight, and fasted to purify her body. The ancient texts were specific about the preparations required for something as powerful as the Moonlight Bond. Magnus entered the chamber as the moon reached its apex. Like Seraphina, he had changed into ritual clothing, a robe of deepest black adorned with silver symbols matching those on the floor. His hair was damp from ritual cleansing, and he had removed all jewelry save for a single silver medallion bearing the gray wolf insignia. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his voice low as he joined her beside the pool. "No," Seraphina answered honestly. "The texts describe the theory, but the actual ritual hasn't been performed in centuries. There are risks beyond what we can predict." "Tell me the worst that could happen." She met his golden eyes directly. "If we fail, the curse could consume us both. If we succeed, but cannot control the bond, our souls become permanently linked. Your thoughts, my thoughts. Your pain, my pain. Your life." She hesitated. "Bound to yours," he finished softly. "Yes. The texts speak of bonded pairs who could not bear separation, who felt physical pain when apart, who died when one partner was killed." Magnus studied her face in the moonlight. "And yet you're willing to risk this, for a man who would have gladly seen you punished for healing a child." "I'm willing to risk it for the pack," Seraphina corrected, "for all the wolves suffering under this curse. Adalric is merely the beginning." A ghost of a smile touched Magnus's lips. "You would make a formidable alpha, little healer." "Too bad I'm just an omega," she replied with a touch of defiance. "Perhaps that's about to change." Magnus looked toward his uncle's still form. "What must we do?" Seraphina moved to one side of the altar. "Stand opposite me. Place your hands over his heart, with your palms facing upward." Magnus did as instructed, his large hands hovering over Adalric's silver-streaked chest. "Now I place my hands over yours," Seraphina continued, extending her arms so her smaller hands rested above his, not quite touching. "The moonlight must fall directly between our hands, creating the channel for the bond." She glanced up at the glass dome, where the full moon hung perfectly centered, its light streaming down to pool exactly where their hands hovered. "When I begin the invocation, the bond will start to form. You'll feel my healing energy seeking connection with your alpha strength. Don't resist it." Her eyes locked with his across Adalric's body. "No matter what happens, what you see or feel, don't break the connection until the ritual is complete." Magnus nodded once, his face solemn in the silvery light. "I am ready." Seraphina took a deep breath and began to chant in the ancient language of the first wolves. The words felt strange yet familiar on her tongue, as if her body remembered what her mind had never learned. With each syllable, the moonlight between their hands grew brighter, more substantial, until it formed a visible column of shimmering silver energy. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with power that raised the hair on Seraphina's arms. The crescent mark on her palm began to glow, pulsing in time with Magnus's heartbeat rather than her own. Across from her, she saw his eyes widen as he felt the first tendrils of the bond forming between them. Then the pain began. It started as warmth, then heat, then searing agony as the silver curse recognized the threat and fought back. The curse in Adalric's body lashed out, sending tendrils of corruption up through the moonlight and into their joined energy. Seraphina gasped but maintained her position. Across from her, Magnus's face contorted with shared pain, but his hands remained steady. "It's attacking us," she gritted out. "The curse is sentient, just as I suspected." "Fight it," Magnus commanded, his alpha voice resonating with power. Seraphina pushed more healing energy into the bond, feeling Magnus match her with his own strength. The column of moonlight between their hands brightened, driving back the silver corruption momentarily. But the curse rallied, pulsing with malevolent purpose as it sought new avenues of attack. Images flooded Seraphina's mind, memories that weren't her own. A young boy watching his parents murdered before his eyes. Adalric finding the child hiding in the forest, covered in his parents' blood. Years of harsh training, of lessons taught with pain and reinforced with more pain. The slow shaping of a boy into a weapon, into a king who would never show the weakness that had destroyed his family. Magnus was experiencing her memories too. She could feel him moving through her past like a visitor in a strange land. Her childhood in the Moonbloom Pack, learning healing arts from the elders, the day the raiders came, the auction block, and the chain of events that had brought her here, to this moment. "Focus," she called to him across the maelstrom of shared consciousness. "Don't get lost in the memories." They fought together against the curse, driving it back inch by painful inch. The silver tendrils in Adalric's flesh began to recede, pushed away by the combined power of Alpha and Omega working in perfect harmony. But as they neared victory, something changed. The curse, sensing defeat, gathered itself for one final, desperate attack. Instead of fighting the healing energy directly, it slithered up the column of moonlight and plunged into Magnus's chest. The Alpha King's roar of pain shook the very foundations of the moonroom. The curse had found the small silver mark on his wrist and was using it as a conduit, flooding his body with corruption. "Magnus!" Seraphina cried, feeling his agony through their partially formed bond. "Don't break the connection," he gasped, his golden eyes now threaded with silver. "Complete the ritual. Save him. Not at the cost of your life." Seraphina made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing to heal Adalric, she redirected the full force of her power through the bond and into Magnus, meeting the curse head-on within his body. The battle that followed transcended physical reality. In the plane where magic and matter intersected, Seraphina confronted the curse directly, seeing it for what it truly was, not just a weapon, but a twisted manifestation of grief and rage given form and purpose. She recognized the magical signature woven into its core, a revelation that staggered her with its implications. "It's not red wolf magic," she whispered aloud, though her consciousness was deep within the bond. This curse was created by a gray wolf. Across the altar, Magnus's eyes widened with understanding. "Adalric," he breathed. The realization gave them both new strength. Together they pushed against the curse, no longer fighting it blindly, but understanding its nature and origin. The silver corruption began to retreat, not just from Magnus, but from Adalric as well, drawn back toward its creator. As the last of the silver left Magnus's body, the moonlight bond flared between them with blinding intensity. The final words of the ritual spilled from Seraphina's lips without conscious thought, ancient syllables that sealed their connection in ways neither had anticipated. The column of moonlight between their hands shattered into countless shimmering particles that enveloped them both in a cocoon of silver light. For one breathless moment, Seraphina couldn't tell where she ended and Magnus began. Their heartbeats synchronized, their breaths matched, and their souls touched in a communion more intimate than any physical connection. Then the light receded, leaving them standing on opposite sides of the altar, hands still extended over Adalric's now healed body. The military leader's chest rose and fell with strong, steady breaths. Not a trace of silver remained on his skin, but Magnus and Seraphina had been transformed. The bond hummed between them like a tangible thread, connecting them across the physical space that separated their bodies. More startling were the physical changes. Seraphina's dark hair now bore a streak of silver matching Magnus's, while his golden eyes had taken on flecks of her deep blue. "What have we done?" Magnus whispered, staring at her with wonder and a touch of fear. Before Seraphina could answer, Adalric's eyes flew open. He sat up with the speed and grace of a much younger wolf, taking in the scene with sharp intelligence. His gaze moved from Magnus to Seraphina and back again, recognition and horror dawning in his expression. "The Moonlight Bond," he said, his voice stronger than it had any right to be. "You fools! You've bound yourselves to destruction." Magnus helped his uncle from the altar, supporting him despite the older wolf's apparent recovery. "We saved your life," he pointed out. "A simple thank you would suffice." But Adalric was beyond gratitude. His face had twisted into a mask of rage and disgust. "You've contaminated the royal bloodline, bound yourself to an Omega. For what? A few more years of my life?" He wrenched away from Magnus's supporting arm. "I would rather have died." "That was an option," Seraphina said quietly. "We chose differently." Adalric rounded on her, and for the first time, she didn't flinch from his anger. The bond with Magnus had changed something fundamental in her, infusing her Omega spirit with Alpha strength. "This changes nothing," Adalric snarled. "You are still nothing but a servant, a tool purchased for gold. And you," he turned back to Magnus, "you are still bound by your duty to the pack, a pack that will never accept an Omega as its queen." "The pack accepts who I tell them to accept," Magnus replied, his voice dangerously soft. "Or have you forgotten who is Alpha King?" "A king serves his people," Adalric countered. "He puts their needs above his own desires. You think they will follow you when they learn what you've done, when they see the proof of your weakness shining in your eyes?" Magnus stepped closer to his uncle, power radiating from him in waves. "I think they will follow me because I am strong enough to evolve, because I recognize that our old ways are killing us as surely as the curse you created." Adalric went still. "What did you say?" "We know, Uncle." Magnus's voice was gentle now, almost compassionate. "We saw the truth while fighting the curse. We felt its origin. You created it, didn't you, after Lyria died?" The military leader seemed to age decades in an instant, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his secrets pressed down upon him. "I didn't mean for it to spread beyond those who deserved punishment," he said, his voice barely audible. "Only the red wolves who took her from me." "But it didn't stop with them," Seraphina said, understanding blooming within her. "Magic born of grief and rage doesn't obey rational boundaries. It grew beyond your control, feeding on your pain, becoming something you never intended." "And then the Red Wolves discovered how to turn it against us," Magnus finished, "using your own weapon to destroy your pack." Adalric looked up, his eyes haunted. "I tried to contain it, to direct it away from our people, but it kept spreading." A bitter laugh escaped him. "The more I fought it, the stronger it grew. The more I insisted on strength through suffering, the deeper it sank its claws into our pack." "Because suffering was feeding it," Seraphina realized. "Pain, fear, rage, these were its nourishment. Every time you punished weakness, every time you forced someone to endure unnecessary pain, you were strengthening the very curse you sought to control." Adalric moved toward the door, suddenly unable to bear their presence. "It doesn't matter now. Nothing matters. I've lost everything I ever cared about." He paused at the threshold, looking back at them with ancient sorrow. "As will you, nephew. This bond will bring you nothing but pain in the end." After he had gone, silence fell over the moon room. Seraphina could feel Magnus's emotions through their new bond, a tumultuous mix of betrayal, grief, and confusion. "He's wrong," she said finally. "About the bond, about everything." Magnus turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, the flecks of blue in his golden eyes seemed to glow. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I understand now what the curse truly is, and how to defeat it." She moved closer, drawn by the invisible thread that connected them. "It feeds on isolation and suffering, on the belief that strength comes from enduring pain alone. Every time someone in this fortress was forced to hide their injuries, to suffer in silence, the curse grew stronger." "And the cure?" Seraphina smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "Connection, compassion, the pack bonds that should have been your strength all along." She squeezed his fingers gently. "The Moonlight Bond didn't create something new between us. It revealed what was already possible. Alpha and Omega working together, each with unique gifts, neither complete without the other." Magnus studied their joined hands, feeling the energy that flowed between them. "If you're right, then everything Adalric taught me, everything I've built my reign upon, was a necessary step to bring you here," Seraphina finished. "You had to learn strength before you could learn when to set it aside. Adalric gave you what he could. Now you must find your own path." A commotion in the corridor outside interrupted them. Victor burst into the moonroom, his normally composed face tight with alarm. "My king," he said urgently, "Adalric has called the pack to the Great Hall. He's challenging your fitness to rule." Magnus's face hardened, the brief vulnerability replaced by royal authority. "On what grounds?" "The bond," Victor replied, glancing at their joined hands. "Word has already spread about the ritual. He claims you've weakened yourself by binding with an Omega." "And the pack's reaction?" Victor hesitated. "Divided. The younger wolves and many of the servants support you. The older warriors and most of the alphas stand with Adalric." "Then it's time to settle this." Magnus strode toward the door, then paused, turning back to Seraphina. "Come with me." "Are you sure that's wise?" Victor asked. "Her presence might inflame the situation." "The situation is well past inflaming," Magnus replied grimly. "And if we're to change our pack's future, it begins now, together." The great hall of the Grey Wolf Fortress had never held so many members of the pack at once. Warriors, servants, elders, and even the youngest pups crowded the massive space, their combined body heat turning the normally cold stone chamber almost uncomfortably warm. At the far end, Adalric stood on the raised dais normally reserved for the Alpha King. His recovery was remarkable. No trace remained of the near-fatal wounds he had suffered mere hours before. He had changed from the sickbed clothing into full military regalia, the medals and insignia of his rank gleaming in the torchlight. When Magnus entered with Seraphina at his side, a hush fell over the assembled pack. All eyes fixed on the visible signs of their bond, the matching silver streaks in their hair, the subtle changes in their eye color, the almost tangible energy that connected them. "Behold," Adalric called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "See what your king has become. Bound to an Omega slave, his power diluted, his bloodline contaminated." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others objecting. Magnus walked steadily forward, Seraphina matching his pace. Though every instinct told her to lower her eyes, to shrink away from the hostile stares of so many alphas, she kept her head high. She could feel Magnus's strength flowing through their bond, bolstering her own. "For generations, the Grey Wolves have stood apart because of our strength," Adalric continued, addressing the crowd rather than Magnus. "We survived when other packs fell because we refused to coddle weakness. We conquered territories others could not because we embraced pain as our teacher." He gestured toward Magnus and Seraphina with open contempt. "Now your king would have you believe that healing is strength, that mercy is power, that an Omega's touch is worth more than a warrior's courage." His voice rose with each point, stirring the crowd. "Will you follow a king who carries the taint of Omega magic in his blood? Or will you stand with me, who has led our armies to victory for 40 years?" Magnus stopped at the foot of the dais, looking up at his uncle with calm dignity. "Are you formally challenging my right to rule, Adalric of the Grey Wolves?" The ancient words of ritual challenge hung in the air. By pack law, any alpha could challenge the king, but the cost of failure was death. It was not a decision made lightly. Adalric smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "I challenge Magnus of the Silver Crown. By fang and claw, by blood and bone, I claim the right of leadership." A collective gasp rose from the assembled wolves. No one had challenged the Alpha King in nearly a decade, and never had a challenge come from within the royal family itself. "I accept your challenge," Magnus replied formally. "By fang and claw, by blood and bone, I defend my right to lead." Adalric descended from the dais, removing his ceremonial cloak and outer garments until he stood in simple training clothes. Despite his age, his body was lean and powerful, honed by decades of warfare. "The challenge circle," he commanded, and the crowd immediately drew back, forming a large ring in the center of the hall. Magnus turned to Seraphina, taking both her hands in his. "If I fall," he said quietly, "run. Victor will help you escape." She shook her head, feeling the strength of their bond. "You won't fall, and I won't run." She squeezed his hands. "Remember what we learned. The curse feeds on isolation and suffering. Adalric has been alone with his pain for 40 years. It has consumed him from within." Magnus nodded once, then released her hands and stepped into the challenge circle. The two wolves began to circle each other, their movements fluid and predatory. "It doesn't have to be this way, Uncle," Magnus said, loud enough for those nearest the circle to hear. "The curse can be broken. The pack can be healed." "There is no curse but weakness," Adalric snarled, his voice thick with contempt, "and only one cure." He launched himself forward with surprising speed, claws extended. Not a full shift to wolf form, but the partial transformation that allowed greater strength while maintaining human agility. Magnus met the attack with his own partial shift, his hands becoming clawed, his teeth sharpening to points. The two alphas clashed in the center of the circle, their movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. Claws raked against flesh, drawing blood that gleamed black in the torchlight. Snarls and growls filled the hall as the challenge fight intensified. Seraphina felt every blow Magnus received as if it landed on her own body, the bond transmitting his pain directly to her nerves. Through gritted teeth, she sent her own energy back to him, not healing yet, but strengthening, supporting. Adalric fought with the desperate fury of a man with nothing left to lose. His claws found Magnus's side, tearing through muscle with terrible efficiency. But where such a wound should have slowed the younger alpha, Magnus barely seemed to notice. The Moonlight Bond channeled Seraphina's healing power to him continuously, closing wounds almost as quickly as they were inflicted. The crowd began to notice. Whispers spread as warriors pointed out injuries that should have been debilitating but seemed to affect the Alpha King not at all. "Witchcraft," someone hissed near Seraphina. "No," Victor countered from beside her. "Pack magic, the way it was meant to be." Adalric realized what was happening. His attacks grew more frenzied, more desperate. "She helps him," he shouted to the crowd. "The Omega corrupts the challenge with her magic." "The bond is part of who I am now," Magnus replied, his voice steady despite the exertion of battle. "As much as my claws or my teeth, would you have me fight without those as well?" Frustration twisted Adalric's features. He lunged again, aiming for Magnus's throat in a killing strike. But the younger alpha was ready, sidestepping the attack and catching his uncle's arm. With a swift, controlled movement, he threw Adalric to the ground and pinned him, one clawed hand at the older wolf's throat. "Yield," Magnus commanded, applying just enough pressure to demonstrate his dominance without causing serious harm. Adalric struggled briefly, then went still. Defeat was clear in every line of his body. By pack law, his life was now forfeit. The entire hall held its breath, waiting for Magnus to deliver the killing blow that would end the challenge permanently. Instead, Magnus released his hold and stepped back. "I claim victory by submission," he announced formally. "The challenge is satisfied." Shock rippled through the assembly. Mercy was not part of the challenge ritual. By tradition, a challenger who failed paid with their life, ensuring that frivolous challenges did not weaken pack leadership. Adalric sat up slowly, confusion replacing the rage in his eyes. "Finish it!" he said hoarsely. "You've won! Claim your right!" "I claim the right to lead differently than those who came before me," Magnus replied, loud enough for all to hear. "Beginning with this. There has been enough death among the Grey Wolves, enough pain, enough suffering disguised as strength." He turned to address the entire hall. "For too long, we have embraced a lie. We believed that to be strong meant to stand alone, to endure pain without assistance, to reject healing as weakness." His golden blue eyes swept the crowd. "But true strength lies in the pack bonds that unite us, in the knowledge that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart." Magnus extended his hand to Adalric, offering assistance that no defeated challenger had ever been offered before. "The silver curse that afflicts our pack was born of grief and isolation. It feeds on our suffering, growing stronger each time we reject connection in favor of solitary pain." Adalric stared at the offered hand as if it might bite him. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Breaking the cycle," Magnus answered simply. "Join me, Uncle. Help me lead our pack toward a future where strength includes compassion, where power includes wisdom, where we are whole, not just fierce." For a long moment, Adalric didn't move. The hall was utterly silent, hundreds of wolves holding their breath as they witnessed history unfolding before them. Then, slowly, Adalric reached up and clasped Magnus's hand, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the great hall. A tension that had been building for generations seemed to release all at once. Seraphina felt it through the Moonlight Bond, a collective exhalation, a cautious hope blooming where there had been only grim determination before. "The Red Wolves still threaten our borders," Adalric said, his voice rough with emotion he was clearly unused to expressing. "Our enemies still gather, waiting for signs of weakness." "Then we will show them a new kind of strength," Magnus replied, "one they cannot counter because they cannot understand it." He turned, extending his hand toward Seraphina. She walked forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. When she reached Magnus, he drew her to his side, his arm encircling her waist, in a gesture that left no doubt about her position. "The Moonlight Bond has joined us in ways none could have predicted," he told the assembly. "Alpha and Omega, strength and healing, two halves of a whole that was always meant to be united." He looked down at Seraphina with a warmth that sent heat flooding through her body. "The ancient texts speak of such bonds as rare gifts from the moon goddess herself, gifts that bring not just personal power, but pack blessing." "What does this mean for the Grey Wolves?" someone called from the crowd. Magnus smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "It means change. It means growth. It means embracing all parts of our nature, not just the teeth and claws." He looked at Adalric. "It means recognizing that our greatest enemies were never the Red Wolves or any external threat. Our greatest enemy was fear, fear that compassion would make us vulnerable, that healing would make us weak, that connection would make us soft." Adalric's weathered face showed the struggle within him, 40 years of beliefs challenged in a single night. "And if you're wrong?" he asked. "If our enemies exploit this new direction?" "Then we will face them together," Magnus answered. "As a pack unified by choice rather than fear, as wolves who fight not just with fang and claw, but with the full power of our bonds." He raised his voice to address the entire hall once more. "The silver curse ends tonight, not through violence or domination, but through the very healing our traditions taught us to reject." He squeezed Seraphina gently. "Beginning tomorrow, any wolf who wishes healing may seek it without shame. Any wolf who wishes to learn the healing arts may do so without fear. A young warrior stepped forward from the crowd, his arm bearing the telltale silver markings of the curse. "My king," he said hesitantly. "Could the Omega? Could she heal this? It spreads more each day." Magnus looked at Seraphina, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, stepping away from his side to approach the young wolf. "My name is Seraphina," she said gently, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Not the Omega. And yes, I can heal you." She placed her hands over the silver markings, drawing on the power of the Moonlight Bond to strengthen her natural abilities. Golden light flowed from her palms, surrounding the curse markings. Where before the silver had resisted healing, now it retreated immediately, dissolving under her touch until the warrior's skin was unmarked. A murmur of amazement spread through the hall. Another warrior stepped forward, then another. Soon a line had formed, wolves of all ranks presenting their silver markings for healing. With each curse she removed, Seraphina felt the collective energy of the pack shifting, lightening, as if a shadow that had hung over them for generations was finally lifting. Through the bond, she sensed Magnus's pride and wonder, not just at her abilities, but at the transformation happening before their eyes. The Grey Wolf Pack, feared throughout the territories for their brutal strength and cold efficiency, was beginning to remember what it meant to be truly whole. Hours later, when the last of the cursed wolves had been healed, Magnus led Seraphina from the great hall. They walked together through corridors that seemed somehow warmer, lighter, despite the stone walls remaining unchanged. "They accepted you more easily than I dared hope," Magnus said, as they climbed the spiral staircase toward the moon room. "They accepted the possibility of change," Seraphina corrected. "Actual acceptance will take longer. Generations of belief don't transform in a single night. But they can begin to transform." Magnus pushed open the door to the moon room, where the reflection pool now shimmered with ordinary water rather than magical energy. The ritual was complete, its purpose fulfilled. He led her to the window that overlooked the fortress and the valley beyond. In the pre-dawn light, the world seemed new, full of potential rather than threat. "What happens now?" Seraphina asked, watching the eastern sky lighten with the promise of sunrise. Magnus turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That depends on you, little healer." His eyes, now permanently flecked with her blue, searched her face. "The Moonlight Bond cannot be broken. We are joined in ways that go beyond any formal ceremony, but whether you stand beside me as my queen or simply as the pack's healer is your choice." Seraphina felt his anxiety through the bond, the vulnerability beneath the confident words. This powerful alpha, this king who commanded hundreds of fierce warriors, was afraid of her rejection. "When you bought me at that auction," she said softly, "I thought I had lost everything. My freedom, my identity, my future." She squeezed his hands. "I never imagined I might gain so much more than I lost." "Is that a yes?" Magnus asked, a rare uncertainty in his voice. In answer, Seraphina rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The Moonlight Bond flared between them, turning the simple contact into something transcendent. Every emotion, every sensation was shared, amplified, reflected back and forth until it was impossible to tell whose joy was whose. When they finally separated, both breathless, Magnus cupped her face with gentle hands. "I will never own you," he promised, "but I will always protect you, honor you, cherish you. And I will always heal you," Seraphina replied, "not just your body, but your spirit, your pack, our pack." As the first rays of dawn broke over the moonlight valley, they stood together in the glow, Alpha and Omega, strength and healing, two halves of a whole that had finally found completion. 1 year later, the Grey Wolf Fortress was transformed. Where once there were only training grounds, gardens now bloomed with healing herbs. The clash of weapons still rang through the courtyards, but now it was accompanied by laughter and encouragement. Warriors who once trained to dominate now learned to protect. Understanding at last that true strength lay in defending others, Adalric, healed of both physical wounds and spiritual scars, found new purpose teaching history and strategy to young wolves. The weight of 40 years of grief had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer defined him. In helping others understand the past, he began to make peace with his own. Magnus moved through his pack like a changed wolf. His power hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. But now it was tempered with wisdom. Where once he ruled through fear, he led through respect. Young wolves no longer cowered in his presence. Instead, they sought his guidance, knowing they would find both strength and mercy in his counsel. The fortress itself seemed to breathe easier. Music drifted from the great hall where once there was only silence. Pups played in corridors that once echoed with harsh commands. Even the stone walls appeared warmer, as if the love that transformed the pack had seeped into the very foundation of their home. On the night of the full moon, when the pack gathered in the courtyard, Magnus took Seraphina's hand before them all. The mighty Alpha, who once saw kindness as weakness, now looked at her with undisguised devotion. "You were brought here as a servant," he said, his deep voice carrying to every ear. "But you freed us all. You've taught us that true strength isn't about how many we can defeat, but how many we can protect. You didn't just heal our wounds, you healed our hearts." Under the silver light of the moon, he marked her as his mate. His gentle bite, a promise of eternal love and protection. Their wolves twined together, black and white, strength and healing, two halves of a whole, finally united. As other alphas and omegas in the pack began to form their own bonds, following the example of their leaders, Seraphina and Magnus stood together on the fortress battlements, watching the transformation spread below them. "Do you ever regret it?" Seraphina asked, leaning into his embrace. "Changing everything your people believed in for so long?" Magnus kissed the silver streak in her hair, a perfect match to his own. "How could I regret finding the other half of my soul?" He turned her to face him, his golden blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The old ways nearly destroyed us. They taught us to stand apart when we should have stood together, to endure pain alone when we could have healed each other." His hand rested gently on her abdomen, where their first child grew, a miracle that would combine Alpha and Omega bloodlines for the first time in Grey Wolf history. "Our daughter will know a different way," he promised. "She will understand that the true soul of a warrior isn't the ability to cause pain, but the courage to heal it." Seraphina covered his hand with her own, feeling their child stir beneath their joined fingers. Through the Moonlight Bond, she sensed Magnus's wonder, his pride, his absolute commitment to the future they were creating together. "She will be extraordinary," Seraphina whispered. "Like her mother," Magnus replied, drawing her close as the moon blessed their union with its ancient light. A light that had guided them from darkness into a future brighter than either could have imagined on that fateful day at the auction block, when an Alpha King paid 100 gold for an Omega healer and changed the destiny of the Grey Wolves forever.